Difference between vector and raster graphics. Hello friends, I hope that you have already changed all the necessary settings that I talked about in the last lesson. So today we continue our travel to Photoshop, and today we will talk about raster and vector graphics. Photoshop is a raster graphic program, although it includes some vector elements. So first we'll deal with raster graphics. Raster image are all photos, scanned images, and images created directly in Photoshop program. All these images have one thing in common. They consist of such small squares, I mean pixels, that you can see if you zoom in an image. As close as possible. Let's try to do it. Last time in Preferences we set the possibility of zooming in and out of the image using the mouse wheel. Let's try to do it. I scroll mouse wheel forward. The image is zooming in. I want to use this hand tool and get it even closer. Look, the closer the image gets, the less clear it becomes. At the same time, we see the pixels with which all this gradation of colors is created. For example, the transition between a green leaf and the petal of a rose has subtle transitions of tones. Each square has its own specific color, but our eye works in such a way that if we are far away from an image or the squares are small enough, then we don't see them, but see the image as we are used to perceiving it, although, in fact, it consists of all these small pixels. People noticed this principle of color perception with our eye a long time ago. Our great-grandmothers created a lot of needleworks according to this principle. Look carefully. Isn't it very similar to pixels in Photoshop? And it is this principle that has always been used to create the most complex mosaics. So in general, the idea is not as new as it might seem. Let's go back to our pixels. Let me zoom in our rows again to see the pixels in all their glory. I remind you, we scroll mouse wheel forward and zoom in the image as much as we want. Sometimes I use the hand tool to move it around the screen. So look, each pixel has its own color. At the same time, all the subtle transition of tone and color of images are created by fact that each pixel has a slightly different tone from the one being next to it. And how can we see this color? In order to work with the color deeply, we use the pipette tool. Here it is. Now I click on one of the colors, and at the same time it appears here. This will be the main color of Photoshop. If you click on the square again, we will see that a certain palette opens, where each color has its own number. For example, if I close this palette and choose some other color, then this number will change. But in order to optimize our work, let's try to do it differently. I just changed some numbers here. So I typed in other numbers and my color changed. This circle shows the color that I have selected, and it is specified as new. Thus, all this beauty, this harmony is created with the help of numbers, because each color has its own number, and accordingly each square, each pixels is some kind of digital design, which means the color that it reflects. According to this information, we can conclude that if pixels are represented by a square of numbers, then these numbers can be changed. By changing the numbers of each pixels, we change its color and change the image as whole. This is what the work in Photoshop really comes down to, just changing the numbers. We change the numbers and the image changes. And as a rule, we are talking about millions of pixels. Just imagine the power. And now let's see what vector graphics are and what is the difference from raster graphics. Now I open a vector image and will try to zoom in it. And look what is going on. I zoom it in. I zoom it in more. Then look at the eye of this whale. We start to see some defects that the artists made when drawing, but no matter how much we zoom in. Now the image zoom level is 6400%. This is the maximum percentage. I specifically opened the image in the vector editor because here we can see all the nuances as well as possible. So the main difference between vector images and raster images is that no matter how much we zoom in this image, it doesn't affect its quality in any way. That is, we can zoom it almost infinitely. We can scale it infinitely too. But unfortunately, we cannot do the same with raster images. This is due to the fact that the principle of building vector images is based on a special mathematical formula. Each element drawn in a vector editor increases and decreases in proportion to their percentage without loss of quality. It just gets bigger or smaller. But another feature of vector graphics is that it is much more difficult to convey those color nuances, those transitions of semitones, that are possible when working with raster graphics. Let's summarize. Vector graphics differ from raster graphics in that no matter how we increase it, we will never see pixels. It gives us unlimited scaling possibilities, but on the other hand, it looks applicative and doesn't give such color nuances, such rich color transitions as raster graphics. Although Photoshop is a raster graphics program, it still includes some vector tools. And of course, we'll definitely get to know them during the course, and we'll learn about what affects the quality of raster images in the next lesson. You have to remember how a raster image differs from a vector one. And when you see some images on the web, try to understand wherever they refer to raster or vector. I think it is easy to do this even by indirect signs, because all images, scanned pictures, and collages that include elements of photography are, as a rule, raster graphics. Well, vector graphics often look like an application and always include large areas filled with one color. Although now there are such masters of vector graphics who create very similar to raster images, but there are very few of them, and at the time you also begin to accurately identify such images at first sight. This concludes our little dive into the depths of vector and raster graphics. I think you have remembered that the main thing in Photoshop is a pixel. I am waiting for you in the next lessons. AIM School was with you. Goodbye.